Hi everybody, welcome to the GoBike Active Travel Hustings tonight. GoBike, our volunteer-led cycle campaign representing the Greater Glasgow area. We campaign for better infrastructure policy and political support for cycling to be a safe, efficient, clean and healthy mode of active travel for everyone. We support the need for our spaces to be designed and readily accessible for everyone, whether walking, wheeling or cycling. We're pleased to have the following representatives with us tonight, and they'll be speaking for the parties. We have Cuab Stewart from the Scottish National Party, Patrick Harvey from the Scottish Green Party, Alex Rowley from the Scottish Labour Party, and David McKenzie from the Scottish Liberal Democrat Party. Unfortunately tonight, Graham Simpson from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party has not been able to join. He has given the following statement. Following the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, we have suspended campaigning until tomorrow. This means that unfortunately I am unable to take part tonight. I will be attending a Cycling UK Hustings next week, so hope to see some of you there. You can find out more information about that on Twitter and stuff like that. Although this is a non-selective hustings, there are 21 list parties standing for the Glasgow regional list. So for practical reasons, we have based our invitations to speak on the local promises of parties, the number of elected representatives at the local and national level, and on the recent election results in the area. We have just launched a poll, thanks to Nick, for you to complete. And we will be following up a poll along a similar question at the end of tonight's session. So hope to take part in that. The event is being recorded and will be available online afterwards for anybody to catch up or see it who have not been able to attend. We have a hashtag for the evening, which we'd love for you to use if you're tweeting. That is hashtag GoBikeHustings. And we plan to finish tonight at 8:30 p.m. So hopefully won't be keeping you for too long. Our campaign supports the three pledges that walk, wheel, cycle and vote are asking candidates to sign up to. So we'll be focusing our initial questions on the three subjects of accessibility, infrastructure and investment. I'll hand over to John now, who's going to explain the proceedings. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Thomas. So I'll quickly go through what we're going to do tonight. So we're still going to be asking our candidates to provide a 1-minute overview of their policies relating to active travel. After that, we will pose 3 questions to each of the candidates. Oh, 2 seconds, it's asking to show my webcam again. Back in the room. As I said, we're going to ask candidates to provide a 1-minute overview of their policies. After that, we're going to pose 3 questions that each of the candidates have had advanced sight on based on the walk, wheel, cycle, vote pledges. We'll then finish with questions and answers from you, the audience. If you type your questions in using the question function in the bar beside you, we'll then ask them to the candidates later on in the evening. Thomas is going to stay with us, as well as Joe. We've got our glamorous timekeeping assistants. So you may hear throughout the proceedings a disembodied voice saying there's a 10-second warning. So our candidates shouldn't get too worried about that. I'm now going to hand over to Iona, who's also going to be co-hosting the hustings with myself tonight.
Hi everyone, thank you all so much for coming and welcome. So we are now going to kick off with 1-minute statements from each of our candidates. If we could ask you all to put your screens on, please. And to keep things fair, what we're going to do is start in the order in which our candidates initially confirmed that they'll be attending. So that means that Patrick, you're going to go first. So you have 1 minute. Patrick.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks to all of you for organising the hustings today. Obviously, one of the things that we're going to talk about is funding. Scotland doesn't pay for infrastructure for the built environment to be safe and easy for people to walk, wheel and cycle in the way that we need to. And even though it's starting to come up the agenda a little bit, in my experience, it's mostly focused on a small number of sort of destination routes, if you like. And what I need as a cyclist in Glasgow is for our whole transport network to be open and accessible to me and to other cyclists. And I think a big part of that is road culture. So the Greens have worked hard to increase spending in this area, reaching over £100 million a year for the first time as a result of our most recent budget agreement. But that needs to be more than treble, so that it reaches 10% of the transport budget. And we want to see that part of an even bigger pot that is partly for active travel and partly for 15-minute neighbourhoods. But the culture on our roads and in our public spaces needs to change. Things like presumed liability could help to do that. Parking enforcement is one of the biggest things that bugs me as a cyclist. And okay, loads of other stuff which will come up later in the questions. But thank you very much for the invitation to take part in the discussion.
Great, thank you very much, Patrick. And now we're going to go over to CoCab, Stuart from the SNP.
Hi there, good evening everyone. The SNP is committed to an active travel vision, and as a teacher I know how important it is to make walking and cycling the most popular way to get around. Active travel is fundamental to a sustainable network, and the SNP has appointed an active travel commissioner to pursue this. The climate change plan update boosts our commitments with a 5-year investment of over £500 million, which includes infrastructure projects, access to bikes, and very importantly, behaviour change schemes. If re-elected, the SNP government will ramp up its efforts to become a net zero nation by 2045, with significant and wide-ranging investments to reduce our emissions and improve our quality of life. And the programme of government announcement has ensured record annual investment in active travel for the next 5 years, but I recognise that that can go further. So we want to encourage and support local authorities to deliver these ambitious targets in Glasgow and across Scotland. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, CoCab. So next we can hear from David, please. David Mackenzie from the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Well, thanks for having me, Chair, and thanks everybody for attending. So, look, we're in a really interesting situation. We're coming out of a COVID pandemic where a lot of people are now choosing to actively not travel for work. And in fact, there's a lot of home working policy that's going to be coming into effect. So there really shouldn't be a need to advocate for more cars coming into places like city centres. And what we actually need to be doing is empowering local authorities to be able to make changes to places like city centres in Glasgow to allow more people to travel by means like walking, cycling, taking public transport in a larger scale. But we also need to be investing in change culture processes. So how do we work with young children and things like cycling proficiency to make sure that they feel safe and able to travel on roads? But we also need to make sure that we're actually advocating more people to take to their bikes in cities, because as we all know, there's absolute safety in numbers. So we need to get more people on the roads in places like Glasgow. And we would commit massive investment in not only to active walking and cycling, but also to larger public transport infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Very well timed, thank you. And finally, we do have Alex Rowley from the Scottish Labour Party with us. Do you want to put your camera on, Alex? Or?
I'm sorry, I'll not go on. I don't know. I'll just speak anyway.
Go for it, yes. You have a minute.
Okay, well, thanks for the opportunity to participate in this tonight, and thank you for everybody that's organised that. For the Scottish Labour Party, the next Scottish Parliament must focus on recovering from COVID. That means focusing on rebuilding our economy, saving people's jobs and getting new training opportunities through investment, for example, in energy efficiency homes, but also for investment in public infrastructure that will create the opportunities, the skills and the jobs. It means remobilising our NHS and supporting people's well-being and mental health, and these have to be the priorities. It means tackling our climate emergency and tackling deep-seated inequalities in our communities that this pandemic has demonstrated are there for all to see. And all of these ambitions for recovery, encouraging people to walk, wheel and cycle safely has a key role to play. But we need to acknowledge where we're at. We need to acknowledge that today we've actually failed the Scottish Government target, for example, for cycling in the Cycling Action Plan for Scotland said that by 2020, 10% of everyday journeys will be made by bicycle. Today, that has been stuck at 1%. Now, that's not to blame the government or blame anyone else. It is to say that, you know, this is a massive task. It needs the investment, it needs the resources. Labour are certainly committed to that. And as we go on through this evening, I'm sure we'll hear more about that, and I will try and get my camera to work. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alex.
Cool, brilliant, thank you for that. We're now going to move to the questions. So there's 3 questions that we've actually provided the candidates in advance. These are based on the walk, cycle, wheel, vote pledges of accessibility, infrastructure and investments. So again, the representatives have 1 minute to answer each of the questions. However, we're then also going to give the candidates a further 2 minutes that they can use to respond to each other. We want to try and encourage some dialogue between different candidates, but at the same time, we don't want people to go on for too long. So each time you respond to one of the other candidates, your 2 seconds will start to reduce. As I said, we've got Joe and Thomas in the background, basically timing you to see how much time you've got left. If the candidates indicate, basically after someone else has asked a question, just basically raise your hand. I'll then bring you in so you can then respond. The first question is from Iona.
Okay, yeah, so as John mentioned, our first 3 questions are based on the 3 pledges. So the first one is on accessibility, which is what we'll start with. So the question is this: if elected, what would you personally do to ensure that our streets, in particular around active travel measures, meet the needs of all users of the spaces, including children, people with disabilities and older people? And we're going to put that first question to you, CoCab.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, during lockdown, with schools in particular, you know, speaking as a teacher, everyone was walking. I looked at sort of like, you know, keeping everybody local. Some of the ideas I thought of was having local walking buses for children, as well as sort of like having safe cycle routes. I mean, certainly down at Hindland Primary School, you know, they've got big posters there to encourage safe spaces for children. So the angle that I come at from this is the children are the priority, to make sure that they can get around safely and they can get to school. A lot of the traffic on the roads is to do with the school run. So if I can sort of address that and highlight that to the best of my abilities, then I think that that'll make a significant difference. Also buses as well, to make sure that they're fully accessible, and make sure we've got plenty of them that are regular, and to have plenty of space for buggies as well as wheelchairs, so that people are not competing against one another for that.
Okay, great, thank you. David, would you like to pick up on that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, in terms of accessibility, I have a bit of a dog in this fight. So my sister-in-law is actually living with a learning disability. So we need to make sure that all our roads are able for everybody to use and be able to get around town. The Liberal Democrats obviously support the 20-minute towns and cities, so that you can actually travel quite quickly from your door by walking or cycling to the areas that you need to go to. But I think when you look particularly at Glasgow, we need to invest more in particularly the thing that I've supported from a petition-wise is the fact that it's a travesty in this day and age that our subway is not accessible to wheelchair users. I think there's only 2 stations in the whole of the Glasgow subway that are actually wheelchair accessible. That shouldn't be happening nowadays. We need to make sure that all our public transport networks and all our road networks are absolutely accessible for people who have learning disabilities, they have disabilities to be able to get around. So I think accessibility is a huge issue and we need to be doing more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to put this one now to Alex, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the partnership is key to this. Where I've seen some excellent projects around accessibility, it's been where the local authorities have worked with different organisations. Where I live, I mean, I don't cycle now, but I did cycle through my youth and my teenage years and my 20s. You'd be terrified to let your children go out in the streets where I live because of the amount of potholes, the absolute state of the street. You'd be worried, I'd be worried to allow my grandchildren to go out in bikes. So we need to recognise that local authorities, when you cut their budgets, there's no point in MSPs and parliamentarians then attacking them for the state of our roads and the state of our pavements when the budgets have been cut. So this really does need a new approach. It needs a partnership with local government, and it needs local government to have a partnership at the local level, whether it's in cities or it's in rural areas, to work together, and for central government to recognise its responsibilities in financing that. But right now, to encourage children to go out into the streets when the streets are unsafe and full of potholes and a total mess. So let's start by fixing our roads and fixing our pavements so that it's safe for people to use them.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And finally on that question, we'll go to you, Patrick.
I think Alex is right that many parts of our towns and cities do feel unsafe to cycle, and I know that. I feel unsafe cycling in Glasgow sometimes, but I also know that it's the most joyful way to get about the city, and it's the most social way to get about the city. So we really need to be changing those perceptions about safety as well as the reality of safety. I think that role of an individual MSP, showing by doing is one of the most important things, but also challenging decision makers. And I think my track record of challenging the council when it didn't want to include, for example, segregated bike provision in its redevelopment of Byres Road, challenging the university when they didn't want to include it on University Avenue, challenging ScotRail when they didn't include adequate cycle facilities in their first version of their plans for the redeveloped Queen Street. If you remember the wild lack of capacity just for parking your bike at Queen Street as it was. And once that's fully developed, it will have a much better provision. But it's also about challenging that decisions are made in the right way, not just the right decisions. The council's recent debacle in the East End, where they didn't consult and they treated folk like cyclist lobby groups as though they're a kind of hindrance rather than a resource of skills and expertise and knowledge. And as a result of that, you've got community division and decisions having to be gone back on. So we need to be listening to people and making decisions in an inclusive way.
Great. Okay, thank you, folks. So that's everyone on question one. So John, over to you.
Cool. So next question is on infrastructure. And with almost less than half the people in our major cities, including Glasgow, having access to a private car, our towns and cities should no longer be dominated by the motor vehicle, but designed around basically people. How would your party enable any child to walk, wheel or cycle to their school? And we'll go first to David in that one.
Thanks, John. So look, first of all, you need to empower local governments to be able to make these changes. So the first thing to do is to allow local governments to change how they do town centre planning, to allow them to do things like the 20-minute neighbourhood approach, to allow it to be more accessible for people to walk, wheel and cycle to their everyday life and what they want to do. But secondly, I think the approach that we need to do is, first of all, we need to bring forward the 50 million programme for active freeway funding that's been delayed until 2025. That has to happen now, not in 2025. And I've been quite benefited in the fact that I've worked away from Scotland for a number of years. So I've worked in London, I've worked in Utrecht, in Holland, and I've also worked in places like San Francisco and Silicon Valley. The ability to be able to just get on a bike and be able to go out and cycle is great. So we need to make more of an investment as well in bike facilities that are available for people that maybe don't have access to their own bike, to be able to just jump on a bike and go cycling when it's available to them. So that's why we would absolutely encourage investment in more things like e-bike provisions and also the bike programme facilities in Glasgow that are currently there.
Perfect, thank you. And next we're going to go to, if I can get my list. Alex, could you answer that question, please?
Yeah, I was just thinking there as the question came up. I was working in London at the time when they introduced the charging policies, and it was Ken Livingstone, if people remember back that far. And there was an option in Edinburgh to do likewise, but they put it to a vote of the people, and the people voted against that. Whereas in London, they just did it. And I remember at that time being amazed at the difference that it actually made to the centre of London in terms of reducing traffic. So I think we need to think about bigger measures if we're talking about our city centres, and that's for me a good example of where you actually saw firsthand the traffic reducing and therefore making it much more accessible for people to get about a busy capital city. That's what we need to do. But whether, you know, politicians have to then have the willingness to do some of these things that are unpopular, as Livingston did in London at that time. Otherwise, then you know, most things will seem unpopular to people. So that I think is one example that I would give. And as others have said, we need to see investment in infrastructure. But how you plan that, I saw in Aberdeen recently, as well as in Edinburgh, there's been a lot of criticism of some of the steps that have been taken to try bring about improvements, particularly for cyclists. So you need to work with communities to do this. But there are some big decisions that you could make that are not always popular, but would solve particularly the city centre problems. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Patrick, same question to you.
Yeah, well, I agree. There are decisions that you can make, but when we've tried to do that, very often we find all the other political parties jumping up and down about a war on motorists. We managed to persuade the Scottish Government that workplace parking, for example, workplace parking charges could be a system that might work. It's worked in Nottingham. We should try it here. It's not even about imposing that, just allowing local authorities to design a system and decide whether they want to do it. And we had Labour, Lib Dem and Tories all throwing up their hands in horror at this war on the motorists. There is no war on the motorists. You know, I think back as well to my first experience as an MSP. I was elected at a time when the debate was about the M74 Northern Extension, 5 miles of urban motorway, you know, on concrete stilts for £500 million. I think it cost more than half, 700 million in the end, didn't it? For that amount of money, you could have transformed the public transport, the active travel, the cycling infrastructure, the pavements of our entire city. Did we? No, we passed up that opportunity in order to shave 3 or 4 minutes off a drive to the airport. And we still see hundreds of millions of pounds, in fact, billions of pounds being spent on a road building programme that will make our congestion and our pollution and our ill health problems worse, as well, of course, as contributing to the climate emergency. So if we're serious about these commitments that are being made across all the political parties today about shifting the priority, we need to start shifting the money as well away from the road building programme and giving local authorities the power to introduce you know, innovative new measures to fund both public transport and active travel infrastructure, and stop campaigning against it with Daily Mail style rhetoric.
Cool. Thank you, Patrick. And CoCab, to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think this is where sort of like the e-bike grant fund is quite helpful, and I personally know lots of people that have taken that up, and members of my own family are taking that up as well. So I'd like to see that continue, and I'd certainly be pushing to enhance that as much as possible. There's also been sort of, you know, a reasonable amount of money. I think it's about 39 million that have been, you know, that's been invested in spaces for people as well. Along with sort of cycle repair schemes, all of these things, I think, you know, really help. The questions about children, and again, you know, referring to my earlier answer, I think having car-free zones around schools is not only going to sort of like tackle emission, but also I think it's going to possibly force people, you know, parents in particular, I suppose, to let their children walk to school in a safe way. And this is where walking buses can come in very, you know, helpful. Children love it. I've seen it, and, you know, I've done it with them. So yeah, things like that. And also like the cycle proficiency. I'm not a confident cyclist. I never had that when I went to school. So I'm very keen to make sure that at primary school in particular, that we have more formalised way and further accessibility for every child to be able to learn to ride a bike in a safe way, and then that produces a next generation that has a different emphasis.
Perfect timing. Thank you. Iona, the last question, please. You're on mute.
There we go. Final question on the Walk, Wheel, Cycle, Vote pledges goes, it's about investment. So bear with me, there's a few numbers in this, but it is a question on investment. So here we go. The Bike Life report in Glasgow has shown that 78% of Glaswegians would like to see more investment into cycling in Glasgow. Scottish cycle campaigns such as Pedal in Parliament, Walk, Wheel, Cycle, Vote and Cycling UK are all calling in their manifestos for the active travel budget to be increased to 10% of the transport budget and rising to 20% during the course of the next Parliament. Currently, we're sitting at around only 3% allocated to active travel. Is this proposed budgetary allocation something you and your party would support? And how would you begin to divert funding to achieve this, particularly in the age of a climate emergency? So we're going to put this first one to you, Alex.
Well, our aim would be to reach the 10%. So we're not giving a commitment to 20%. I think we need to be honest about how far we can travel. But I do think that the key issues here is, firstly, stop cutting the local authority budgets. If you look at the disproportionate cut to the local authority budgets that transport takes generally, because I have led a council, a large council, and when you're sitting having to make cuts and you're looking at social work budgets, education budgets, or you're looking at transport budgets, I'm afraid that's what happens, and that's the reality of the situation. So it's not just about how much money the Scottish Government can put into a national programme, it's also about how you fund and how you work with local authorities. I believe local authorities are absolutely key to this. You know, Patrick gave the example earlier about the workplace parking charges, but if you take a place like Fife, where I represent, the workplace parking charges would be a complete nightmare, and it's because it's far more rural to try and get to places. The bus services are terrible, so you need a joined up bus service, you need a joined up transport service, and at the same time as that, you need to stop cutting local authority budgets, because, as I say, if you look at the cuts to local authority budgets, it will be disproportionately on those smaller services, because councillors sitting choosing between social work, education or transport. That's how it turns out, I'm afraid. So that's the reality. It's not just about individual funding, it's about the funding to the local authorities, it's about the funding that's available across, and it's about empowering local authorities, putting powers down the way, no taking them centrally. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Patrick, I don't know if you wanted to come in there, but you were going to be next anyway, so Patrick.
Well, yeah, if I can use up a few seconds of my rebuttal time, I'll just quickly say, if Fife thinks that a workplace parking charge scheme wouldn't work for Fife, then Fife doesn't need to do it. Giving councils the ability to choose, giving councils the ability to design a system that will work for them and then go ahead with it if they think that it's the right thing to do, is absolutely fine. And it wouldn't need to be imposed on anywhere that thinks it wouldn't work for their local area. We should be empowering our councils with many more different ways of raising funds, so that they're not so dependent on a single block grant from Edinburgh. And the Greens, through budget negotiations, have halted the decline in that block grant from Edinburgh. The bulk of the cuts that councils have endured were in the 2011 to 16 period, when the government had a single party majority and didn't need to negotiate. We've managed to replace a lot of that funding. We've not boosted it up to where it should be. We've halted the decline, and that's better than nothing. I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect. Moving on to the manifesto asks around spending. Yeah, the Greens are committed to an immediate increase to 10%. It's currently at about 3%, and we've managed to get it up there to above 100 million a year, but that's not enough. So we would treble it to get to 10%. We would like to see a 20% of the national transport budget for not just active travel, but also 15-minute neighbourhoods within that that 20% pot. But finally, I just wanted to say as well, it's not just about public spending. It's about employers. What are employers doing to fund bike to work schemes, to fund bike parking, covered, secure bike parking, to fund showering facilities, to make sure that people can choose to bike and to walk as well to work. There's a whole host of different areas of spending, local government, national government, but also the private sector need to be given incentives to put money into these priorities.
Okay, great, thank you. A rebuttal into the answer to the initial question. That was smooth, thanks. We're going to move next to you, CoCab, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. I listened with interest to the other answers, and I think that consensus works well in this. So from what I can see, when parties come together and you've got an agreed priority, then that is a good thing. So it's brilliant that the Greens and the SNP can work together on this. To me, the Scottish Government makes the decisions, but ultimately it is the councils that have to implement it. So that is where I would like to see more empowerment from councils to be innovative and to have local solutions that Patrick has alluded to. So I think with travel in general, all these different schemes exist. There's loads of them, I could list them. However, to me, it's about education and an attitudinal and behavioural change as well. Yes, people need to travel to get to work, to get to school, but also with COVID, what it's shown me is that do we need to travel so much as well? We need to be more flexible in our working practices, and people that can work from home and have hybrid models, that cuts down on travel as well.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. And finally, on our final pre-prepared question before we move to questions from the audience, and this is just a reminder, if you have a question, do add it into the Q&A box there. But finally, on this one, if we could move to you, please, David.
Yeah, sure. So just one quick rebuttal point. So my partner actually went to Nottingham University, and although they do have workplace parking charges, they do also have quite an extensive network of tram systems that allow people to get around the city quite quickly, which obviously Glasgow doesn't have a hugely integrated transport system, and we need to make sure that public transport is available to all. And in fact, I would even advocate an easy multi-pass system that would allow you to use such things as the subway, the bus, etc., all in one. But just to kind of touch a little bit on what the Liberal Democrats would actually do. So first of all, 75% emissions reduction by 2030, which is an aggressive target, and we would also make sure that all public transport within that time frame is off all fossil fuels, so it's completely green public transport system within Glasgow and other regions as well, but a sustained long-term investment. Now look, at this point in time, we wouldn't sign up to the 10%. And the reason why is because we would want to take a full spending review in the next term of Parliament that would look at what the investment level is needed for both active travel and for rail and bus as well. Because from my opinion, you can't dissociate those two things from each other, because you will have people who ultimately will have to come in to the city centre for work purposes, even though probably we'll have a reduction in how much people will come in after the pandemic. And we'd just be slightly concerned about if we advocate sort of a percentage and then we ultimately find out that we would have to also look at how we further invest rail and bus, that we wouldn't actually come to a really progressive vision for how public transport and active travel could work for people in future generations. And that's what we'd advocate for.
Yeah, CoCab, would you like to come in on a rebuttal?
Well, it's not necessarily a rebuttal. It just sort of, I think Glasgow City Council has sort of commissioned a plan, I think, to look at sort of like a monorail type setup. So they're exploring that idea, which sounds very exciting. And also, there's the electric buses rollout as well. I mean, I've certainly been very vociferous in the past to make sure that we can secure that, especially in the Kelvin area on our arterial routes, especially where the emission zones are very high. So it was just to sort of, point that out.
Yeah, thank you very much. David, did you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just a slight piece here on obviously advocating for green travel. So look, in my day job, I do a lot of consulting with manufacturing companies, and I've done some work with Wrightbus over in Northern Ireland, who've obviously brought in hydrogen buses. And it just, The fact that they got commissioned by the Scottish Government and European investment money to bring in hydrogen travel to Aberdeen and Dundee, when actually the most polluted city centre in the whole of Scotland is Glasgow, especially Hope Street, which has not met its European standards for pollution for a number of years, apart from last year because people weren't travelling during the pandemic, but obviously that's an outlier year. So we really need to look at why has Glasgow not been the #1 focus? Because it's the most polluted city in Scotland.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to hand back over to John now.
Cool. So we're now going to go into the questions from the audience. We're actually going to start with one question that we got earlier from Emily. Before I say that though, I should remind you, again, the candidates, you've got 1 minute to answer each question. You don't have to answer every question, but please participate as much as you can. Also, the audience, please ask more questions in the box. We do have quite a lot, so we'll see how well we're doing though. Time-wise, we're actually not too bad. We didn't get that many rebuttals. And we got quite a nice smooth rebuttal from Patrick, so it didn't use too much of his time. But in terms of the first question, it's from Emily, who asks, given the worsening climate crisis, what is your party's position on reducing overall private car use? And if you commit to doing this, how do you propose about doing it? And does anyone want? We've actually got a set order for this, a lot of questions, so it's whoever wants to go first. If we find that you do want to actually answer them all, we'll create an order as we go through. Okay, Patrick, you're first.
Yeah, back in the day, there used to be road traffic reduction targets, and they got scrapped by the Labour-Lib Dem coalition and never replaced by the SNP when they took over. So certainly there does need to be an ambitious approach to having road traffic reduction targets. And I think most political parties are now on that page again. I think we need to come to see transport slightly closer to the way that we see things like waste management or energy. Nobody talks about energy or waste management anymore without talking about demand reduction, trying to reduce the volume of the problem rather than just meeting ever more demand. And yet transport is still seen as a kind of more of policy. Like health and education, you want, another school, another hospital. With transport, so many politicians want to have a picture on their desk of the thing that they built, which is usually a road, and themselves in a hard hat cutting a ribbon, right? That's what delivery feels like. And I think we need to get to the point where we're seeing demand reduction within the transport system as critical. And obviously one of the most important ways of doing that is take space away from private car use and give that space to active travel and give it to public transport. Physically shifting who gets to use space in the public realm is the most fundamental way of doing that, as we've seen in those other European countries that have been successful in the long term at changing choked, polluted, car congested cities into really beautiful, healthy places to walk and cycle in. It's been done by shifting who gets to use what space.
Cool, thank you, Patrick. Does anyone else want to come back in the question? I can repeat it again if you need. Hi, go Cap.
Yeah, I was just going to come in there. Patrick makes very good points about reducing, and I would sign up to that myself, is that we do need to actually cut down on it. But how do we actually do that? The reality is that, and I don't agree with it, but obviously, people who have cars, they get very anxious and very upset because they can't park right outside their house and all these things, and you have to listen to that. I mean, when the cycle lanes went in Clarence Drive, I was getting, lots of people coming up to me saying, oh, 3 parking spaces have been taken away, and you have to take that, you have to listen to it. But what I would say is that, that education program and incentivizing people to see that there's an alternative way, and if you provide sort of like an integrated transport system, including rail, and of course the SNP has committed to nationalising ScotRail as well, so the focus is more on passengers and workers obviously as well, so the timetables can be looked at there, so the trains are there. Also through ticketing, I mean, that would make things a lot easier, is if you've got the same ticket that can get you on different modes of transport and you can jump on and jump off and make that very affordable, I think that incentivizes it as well. But attitudinal change takes a long, long time, and you know, I for one wouldn't give up tub thumping on it. And I'll go back to, if we're raising a generation of children that have these expectations to be able to walk and cycle, and the emphasis is not on the car, then that demand is going to come through our generations. But I recognise it's a tricky issue, but absolutely worthwhile pursuing.
Thank you. David, Janika, did you want to say something?
Yeah, look, the question that was asked, look, the climate crisis is something that we need to recognise now and do things about now. It can't wait. Ultimately, I would say, from my perspective, there needs to be much more blue sky thinking when it comes to the Scottish Parliament about how we solve these issues. But ultimately, it does come down to devolving more powers down to local level. So some examples I would give is that I've done some work before in places like Belgium, where Hassel in Belgium was able to make all public transport free in the city to allow people to travel and choose not to take their private car into the city centre. And they actually funded that through not having to actually pay for pothole damage and pothole repairs. So there are opportunities out there to do big ideas that can change how the city centre works. And also, as I mentioned before, you know, I've had a good opportunity in my life to, and been quite privileged to go out and work in places like California. And you just have to look at the work that's been done there, especially to move people away from fossil fuel pollutant cars towards more hydrogen friendly vehicles. And that's taken a massive investment. Now, Scotland is hugely benefited in the fact that we could produce our own hydrogen at scale, and we could do this quicker and faster than a lot of other countries because of our natural resources. So we really need to be looking at how we put major investment into that. And even if we can't get people en masse out of private cars, perhaps we can get them to a better, greener alternative.
Thank you, David. Alec, are you want to come in? I'll go. No. Ira, do you want to pick up? Oh, Patrick, you've got a wee come back there.
Yeah, I just wanted to, you know, not exactly rebut anything that anybody said, but we really need to be willing across all political parties to challenge cultural assumptions around stuff like this. There's a cultural assumption that everybody has the right to fly as much as they want, and we come to treat aviation as casually as buses, right? In reality, 15% of people take 70% of the flights, and we need to change the cultural assumption that that is acceptable or okay. And in just the same way, people who own one of these giant metal boxes culturally have an expectation that they can put it wherever the hell they like, that they can drive it where they like and park it where they like. We need to change that cultural assumption, and we should be able to say it's an aspiration that your kids can play in the street and that that's safe, that it's an aspiration that you can breathe clean air and that that's safe. There needs to be a cultural expectation that that stuff is normal, rather than the cultural expectation that you know, putting your giant metal box wherever you want is a normal expectation. That's not a normal thing to do.
Yeah, it's sort of, I think, but the young people these days, what I'm finding is that they, you know, I speak to them and they are thinking that way, you know, that they want to be outside. And I think COVID has let them sort of flourish in that sense, is that, you know, they've spent so much time inside that when they get outside, they want to use their legs, they want to run around. So, you know, providing like free bus passes to under 22s, I think is fantastic. And I'd certainly like to see that extended. You know, you can just jump on, jump off, all these short journeys, but actually they can get much wider on that. You know, the network of buses that we've got in Glasgow is fantastic. So if we've got up to 22-year-olds that are used to sort of like being able to jump on and off a bus, then they're going to be less likely to want to actually get a car in the first place. So, you know, that there is movement there. I am very hopeful that it's moving in the right direction.
I agree completely with that last point, and Kirkup, you must be very pleased that the SNP didn't have a majority in the current Parliament then, because the budget negotiations that allowed that bus travel policy to come in have achieved that. But wider than that, we don't have a great bus service in in Glasgow. We've got an expensive and an unreliable bus service in Glasgow. We should be taking that back into public ownership as well as the railways.
Cool, thank you. Just one point to note, Alex unfortunately is having some further than technical visual issues. He's now also having sound issues. Nick is trying to get that resolved with him just now, but we'll continue on to the next question. And you want to pick up the next question, please?
Yep, I can do. Thank you very much. I think there's a couple of questions that have just come in fairly recently that I think follow on a little bit from what you have been discussing already. And one of them was certainly on the integration between active travel and public transport. A few of you mentioned that in your answers, but I wonder, this comes from JB. In terms of everything you've discussed so far, what can we actually do in rural areas? We're talking a lot about cities, and obviously rural areas present different challenges. So any thoughts on that? David?
Look, rural areas are obviously, if you're going to link public transport to rural areas, you have to have significant investment in things like bus routes, and you also need to make sure that, because we do have a lot of private businesses that run bus companies, that they don't decide to just cut services because it's not financially viable. So that means there does need to probably be either taking those private companies into public ownership, I should say, not the other way around, or you need to make significant investments from a national and local level to keep those routes open. Alternatively, you leave a lot of rural areas absolutely cut off from places they need to get to because you have to take a car to travel. My in-laws live in a very rural location, and they have to travel to get to services. They have to travel to get to their GP, to get to their local supermarket to do shopping. And we should be making more of an investment in public services and public transport to rural locations to allow them to be connected up to the wider community.
Okay, great. Alex, it's great to have you back. Apologies that you've missed out on some of this. An opportunity here for you to come in on anything that's been discussed or to answer this particular question if you like.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. Technology is not my favourite thing. I think in terms of the buses, I mean, the deregulation of the buses has been a disaster for bus services, and therefore you need to have, at a minimum, the re-regulation of buses, giving local authorities far greater control. Personally, I'm a big fan of community transport, and where it's been done well, it's been done really well. That means that local authorities need to be able to put the resource and support into community transport operators. In some areas, as I say, it's worked well. In others, in my own area, it's not worked so well. And community transport sadly didn't get the support that it needed from the local authority. But so those are in terms of rural, those are two areas. I've also seen some good investment. If you go up the Highlands and areas like that, there are some really good investment going on focused cycling and walking routes, and that's an area where I think we could actually achieve a lot more in rural communities, linking up. I would love to link up every town and village in Fife, for example, so that you can basically cycle and walk. Now, they are getting there with that. The Fife Council have been doing quite a good job, but it just demonstrates again where it's got to be partnership between communities and local authorities. I cut off at the point where Patrick was answering my previous point. I actually think it's not just about, when we talk about constitutional politics, actually local government is the area we need to focus more on and be far greater powers, both in terms of raising money, but just generally having the powers to do things in local government. And that's where you'll deliver on this agenda. You'll deliver on infrastructure and you'll deliver on skills and jobs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. So would anyone else like to come in on that, on the question of what can we do in rural areas? Yeah, CoCap.
Okay, thank you. Just very short. I don't want to repeat, some great suggestions from other people, but I think with rural areas, creative schemes that I can think of are things like car sharing, because you're not, the distances that people are going to travel, cars are going to be there. That is a reality of it. So how do we cut down on that? And having sort of community setups where you know, you almost have like a mini bus system, but, you know, using the cars that are there. E-bikes as well, I think, you know, they have the power and the ability to go much, much further. And people can use those. So I think e-bikes are fantastic for that kind of thing. And also railways. I think this is where, you know, there was a sort of like a de-investment in the railway system, and a lot of railway stations and things were closed down. And this is an opportunity where we can re-look at linking sort of like villages and shops and everything with the railways. And the last point is just about canal routes. You know, the ones that I've seen that have sort of like opened up, I mean, you can cycle all the way from Glasgow to Edinburgh kind of thing, and you know, a lot of that is along canal routes, which is just fantastic. Who knows, perhaps one day I could attend something like that.
Well, we'd love to take you on a ride with us sometime if you're up there. David, you put your hand up there.
Yeah, just quickly, it was one point that I forgot to actually make, which was in terms of how we think about these things with rural transport. Not that I would ever advocate Uber because it has some really bad practices, but first of all, there is some schemes that have been piloted in places in parts of England that's almost like, if you remember, my granny used to have Dial-a-Bus, right, where you used to dial a bus to come and pick you up and take you somewhere, and it's almost a 21st century Uber style platform to do that. So you can look at where you're trying to go on public transport network and see where the closest bus is available to pick you up. So we probably need to start thinking about these things more in investment on how technology can help us solve these problems, and I think we probably need to move that conversation along a bit as well.
Okay, thank you. And Patrick?
Yeah, that last point is actually quite interesting. I think Uber is just one of many examples where technology in the hands of capitalism fails to achieve the social good that it's capable of, and that if it was you know, more about seeing these platforms as commons, we'd be able to achieve the potential that technology has to offer, but designed in a way that's around meeting social need. I just wanted to say the Greens have a program called Rail for All, which is a 20-year investment program for railways across Scotland. And I think it genuinely does need that long-term approach, as well as the points about public ownership and subsidy of buses. We do need to recognise that subsidy is not a dirty word. You know, countries that have world-class public transport that does meet every area, including the rural areas, they subsidise, and they're not ashamed to do it. This is about meeting social need. It's about saying our society is better when we pay for some things collectively, and public transport is one of them. But lastly, I just wanted to say something about centralisation of services as well, because if people in rural areas have to travel ever further in order to access the services, to be able to access the shops, to be able to access work, then, you know, we're locking in those high demand behaviours. So we need to be willing to decentralise a lot of that stuff. And one of the tyrannies here is efficiency. When the public or private sector places efficiency as its central objective, then you very often get big central systems which they may deliver one size fits all, but it's not the right size and the right fit for every community. So I think we should push efficiency down the agenda a little bit, and recognize provision across all of Scotland may be inefficient, but it may be what people need.
Okay, brilliant. That's a nice roundup of answers there. I'll go over to you now, John.
Cool. So the South City Way in Glasgow is a new cycle route that is less than 2 miles long, but it's taken 5 years to get to its current complete status. And I'm going to bring two questions together, one from Jim Devonshire and one from Ewan Muir, who said that first bit. So how would you improve the speed at which your much needed cycle routes are going to be built? And how would your party work with councils to urgently create a cycle infrastructure network for Glasgow, while at the same time allowing public consultation? Does anyone want to go first?
Not really.
Patrick.
Yeah, if nobody else is biting, I'll have a go. I mean, there are really difficult questions in here about how you achieve public consensus and public agreement, community agreement about change. Quite often, What people want is for the things that they're used to already, the things they've already got, to be made cheaper or easier. And that's for a politician, that's often an easier sell. And that's part of the problem, that a lot of politicians like telling people what you've got at the moment, we'll make it cheaper or easier, rather than saying we'll offer a different kind of solution. So that public dialogue and public consultation is really tricky. And Glasgow, I'm afraid, has a bad track record of doing it, and quite often either seeing cycle campaigners, as I said earlier, as a kind of a thorn in the side or a kind of hindrance, when actually they should be seen as a source of expertise and knowledge. But yeah, also hearing from the people who don't have the loud voice, because the people complaining that they don't have enough parking spaces, the people complaining about how much it costs to park them, will often have access to the newspapers, to social media platforms. People who complain about cyclists, God, they've got a loud voice, haven't they? But it's the marginalised voices that don't often get heard that maybe need to be brought into the conversation. You know, as for speeding it up, you know, clearly there's a political priority here that still attaches to road building projects being greenlit very quickly, and you know, often much more affordable and sustainable transport infrastructure has to jump through so many hoops and hurdles in order to get anywhere. But that's again about political priorities.
Cool. I'll take David, then Alec. David, come in first, and then I'll take you, Alec.
Yeah, sure. So look, it's absolutely about consultation with people. So I've been working on a project recently called Citizens Britain, about how do you actually give more power to people to make decisions for their community, for their city, for the place that they live, and give them more power and how they advocate. So if you look at places like Taiwan, who's been really innovative in bringing in e-democracy into how they make decisions, especially in places like Taipei, their large city infrastructure. They actually used a platform called poll.is, which is actually to allow people to take a particular question, give their feedback on it, see how other people in the area have feedback on it, and then you can gamify the answers to try and come up with a solution that actually fits the majority of people. So they used it for the introduction of Uber into the city. There was some private taxi companies that didn't want Uber to be there. There was some private citizens that did. And they eventually came up with a solution that 90% of the people in Taipei actually agreed with. So I think we need to, again, look at how you bring e-democracy and technology into these decisions to give people more of an active role in how decisions are made in their community. But I do think there is an issue of, with things like the cycling network, it is a priority piece. If you look at Michael Bloomberg's team in New York, they made it a priority to get cycle lanes and on the roads done quickly and effectively, and allow people to feel safe and separated from traffic while they're cycling around the city. And they were able to do that in record time. And then they actually found that record numbers of people took to the roads to cycle, and there's safety in numbers, so people felt more safe. So it's a priority, and it's about how do we get people more involved in the decisions that they make.
Thank you. Alex.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the specifics of the Glasgow case, but I certainly know that previously, when I was a councillor, in fact, there was one community wanted to link up to another, and even when we raised the money to be able to pay for that, we had problems with getting the land. So there was farmers heading onto land and whatever. The planning system itself does not necessarily work to the advantage, and so there's a number of issues I think that need to be looked at, and it's about the local authorities having the power, so that if you say a strategic priority is to link up an area, is to put these in, then you need to have the powers to compulsory purchase of land if you can't get it any other way. Use the same powers for a national house building programme, by the way. I think we need to empower local authorities to be able to take the land at the end of the day if it's a key priority for them. And I think it's about community planning. The Scottish Government introduced community planning way back many years ago, and I'm actually a big fan of it, although it doesn't always work. Because if you had proper community planning, locality planning, you would have communities saying what their priorities were. and they'd be setting out those priorities, and for there you start to build on and deliver on those priorities. So I think community planning is important. I think allowing communities to set the agenda. I think local authorities having the power, so that whether it's land for cycle and walkways, whether it's land for building houses on, they should have the power to compulsory purchase that land. And we need to shift the planning system and make the planning system work for communities. We've had promises about that year on year, and people can come on these hustings and make all these promises. Look back over the last 5 years at the planning bills that came in. They were a damp squab. They really failed to do what should have been done in terms of planning. So it does come back to the point earlier about empowering local government, empowering local councils, but empowering communities to set the agenda. And within that, I'm sure you would see more and more projects coming forward. And that's where the infrastructure comes in, the opportunities for training, skills and jobs, and putting a proper infrastructure in to allow people. The pandemic, I think, has changed a lot of people's way of thinking. Let's build on that, but let's make sure the powers are at a community level to be able to deliver. As I say, I don't know what the reasons were in Glasgow, but the project I was involved in, those were the reasons. Tried to get the land and get the planning in place. Even when we had the funding, it took years just to do those other things. Thank you.
Thank you. Rokab, do you want to come back at all on that?
Yeah, I'll pick up on the bit about I understand that, you know, project, it can be frustratingly slow to get things, and it feels as though we've been at this forever, and we talk about, you know, climate emergencies, and that gives a sense of urgency, and then it's frustrating when things don't happen quickly. However, I would say that, you know, if you want real meaningful consultation, then the downside of that is that actually it does take time to actually listen to views, to have proper surveys, to have the meetings with residents, plus all the different stakeholders, and then to be able to sort of like, you know, navigate the local authority system, the planning system, Scottish Government funding, put all of that together takes time. And I'm a newbie on the block, and I'm sort of like learning how all these mechanisms and things work, and I definitely think that it can be simplified. I do think that the will is very important, that if you want to keep something at the top of the agenda, then you know, you have to shout quite loudly about it and keep it as a priority. So I suppose you know, from where I'm sitting, I can say that it would be a priority for me. You know, I'm very much into making sure that sort of like, you know, these smarter travel corridors are sort of kept open, like extra freeways. And I know that the SNP government has put extra money into that, but, you know, we can do better. We can absolutely do better on that.
Cool. Thank you for that. Iona? Next question.
Great, thank you. Great, so that was really interesting on the speed of active travel provision. We've got another question come in that's focused more around the quality of design and how we work with the local authorities to ensure that is good. So the question comes from Pat, and is: to achieve improved active travel facilities requires local authority adoption of best practice and design standards. Some authorities are having difficulty delivering high quality facilities. There are many other design and delivery issues in Glasgow that arise because of poor management and outdated attitude. How should government assist in accelerating change in local authorities so that their management can deliver better quality active travel facilities that policies intend? Tricky one. Would anyone like to go first? David. Oh, sorry. Sorry, David had his hand up just 1 second before you, and then I'll go to Alex.
Well, it was a very quick answer. If he's concerned about what people's attitudes are like towards active travel, vote them out. That's the easiest way. Get in the correct people to make this a priority and get it done as quickly as possible. But we also need to make sure that, you know, this is not going to be something that's only delivered in places like Glasgow, and I appreciate Alex is here talking about rural investment, but in places like Glasgow, you do have to get private business on board as well about how they promote this and how they are actively involved as well. So I think there needs to be a much wider investment and reaching out towards private businesses about how they can help invest in active travel policies, because ultimately it's going to benefit their employees, it's going to benefit the environment, and it's going to benefit the health of everybody in places like Glasgow to get people out of cars and onto bikes and walking.
Okay, Alex?
I was going to say that it's about engaging and involving people, and involving people with the. I remember back when I was a councillor, and the area that we covered, the Cowdenbeath area, we wanted to put a skate park because the kids were all saying they wanted skate parks. So we got the money, and we come up with the idea that we put a skate park into every area. And I remember one parent saying to me, "When was you last on a skateboard?" And I had to laugh. I'd never been on a skateboard. So, well, who's going to design this? And eventually the CLD worked with all the youth groups and all the communities, and they designed their own. They went and saw them elsewhere. They came up with the designs, and now these skate parks, we've got them, and they're mobbed with people using them. And the lesson in that for me was, you know, you have to engage the community. You have to engage the groups that are involved, and you allow them to start developing and involving that. That's why my last answer I talked about community planning or location planning, but it's about getting people to come together to say, there's what we want, there's our priorities, set it from the community up. That's what's not been happening. There's too many professionals running about telling people in communities what's good for them. Actually, let's put it back and get the communities to start coming forward with their ideas, what is they want, whether that's a community geographically based, whether that's a community of people that cycle, community walking clubs, whatever it is. Bring those people together and start to allow them to drive it. Because up till now, without pointing at any political party, you would have to say on this agenda, you know, we've failed more than we've succeeded. So let's try a different approach. Empower communities. That's what I would say, whether that's communities geographically or communities of interest groups. Empower communities.
Okay, right. Thank you, Alex. Patrick, I think you wanted to come in.
Well, Alex, if you didn't take that opportunity to get on a skateboard, you missed a brilliant photo opportunity. I'd have loved to have seen that. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot in what you say that's right. But this question kind of conflicts a little bit with the last one. You know, doing things quickly or doing things right is sometimes a tension there. Not to say that you know, doing things as slowly as the South City way is the right way. But you know, I come back to the example I mentioned earlier of Denniston, where you know, the Spaces for People program was really important and necessary to get immediate, quick changes of how we use space, particularly because of the pandemic. But it was used in such a bad way. It didn't meet the needs of cyclists. It didn't meet the needs of people walking, and it got people's backs up when people who were using their cars. And a lot of that's had to be, you know, gone back on because it was done so badly. So doing stuff quickly doesn't necessarily get you to the right result. So, you know, I think part of what we need to do, particularly for Glasgow, and I'm not going to try and speak for every other part of the country, but I think particularly for Glasgow, is we need to really set out visually and in kind of easy to communicate ways what the long-term plan is. What kind of city is Glasgow going to look like in 20 years if we have that sustained investment, both in physical infrastructure and in culture change around active travel and public transport? What would Glasgow look like? And I think if we can paint that picture in a more compelling way, that's how we get people excited and engaged in that conversation. And hopefully, as I said earlier, the people who maybe don't have such a loud voice traditionally involved in that conversation and helping to shape that future.
Okay, great, thank you.
Oh, sorry. It was just sort of naturally flowing on. It was my turn as well. Yeah, I mean, I'm very interested in, you know, at school, for instance, if we're doing sort of global citizenship projects and things, and you open up sort of like a problem to a child and say, right, okay, this is what we want for the future. We want an integrated travel system. How, would you do that? You'd be amazed at the innovative ideas and creative ideas that they come up with, because they're not frightened of trying things and looking at things in different ways. Whereas adults, I think sometimes we're set and we're constrained, or we can't do this because of planning, we can't do this and all the rest of it. Whereas our young people don't have that. So how do we harness that? And I think with designers and architects, the way that they look at things, maybe they should connect with young people a little bit more and bring that creativity to it, so that they're not constrained. I mean, I'm also interested in looking at street furniture as well. I mean, some of the streets that you try and navigate, you've got poles coming out here, you've got signs coming out here, you've got elevated pavements, you've got some bits where the curbs are not dropped, some they're too high. So even sort of like simple things like that, and you only discover things like that by walking more and actually experiencing it. So that's me as an able-bodied person. So my concern is for people who have mobility issues, wheelchair users, buggy users, and cyclists, that actually our pavements, and the street furniture, you need to look at that. So you need to go right back to the planning bit of it, and not stick to the things that we know, we must have this, we must have that. Other countries seem to be able to drop like certain things that can pop up when you need them, for traffic control measures and everything. So we should look at that as well. I'll probably run out of time. I'll come back later because I've got a couple of other things that have come to my mind.
Okay, great. Although we too are running out of time, I think we have time for a couple more. John? Oh, you're on mute, John.
To be done. Bus bike related question. Border buses have allowed bikes on some of their buses, and it's been quite a success for them, especially in rural areas. What's your views on allowing bikes on buses? Anyone?
My view is yes, please.
I think I think that, I don't see any problem with it. I think that, again, it comes down to a design issue. That's the thing, is that, we need to have sort of our fleets of buses that are equipped and they've got the proper space where they can be safe and stored. Because what we don't want is people competing, wheelchair users competing with buggy users, competing with bike users as well. I think there's space for everybody. So if we had more frequent buses that were better designed to cope with it, then nobody would be complaining about it. There would be space for everybody, and we've got the creativity to do that. So I think that's a wonderful thing.
David?
Yeah, look, I absolutely support getting bikes on buses. I've seen some countries that have used innovative approaches like having bike racks on the back of buses to allow you to travel on a bus with your bike. I was quite surprised once I was told I couldn't take my bike on a train because apparently it was peak time and there wasn't enough space for it. And I said, well, I'm going to just have to sit here and wait until we're not at peak times because I'm not leaving my bike. It's slightly maddening that you get to this point in time in this century, and there's people who would say, oh no, you can't bring that bike onto this train or bus because it might be not nice for other people to be around. So we need to think about that more.
Cool. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in.
Cool.
Again, I would make the point that if you have buses under greater regulation and the local authorities having greater say over them, and the local authorities are able to then put in place, so if it was a city, a strategic plan for the city, a strategic transport plan, transport hubs, linking transport up, that's got to be the objective. But there'll be people on here with greater expertise than I when it comes to transport. Now, there are other European, I was telling my daughter on Friday that I was doing this tonight, and she was talking about her experience in a number of European countries where they're far in advance of where we are. And I have to think to myself, how do they actually achieve that? And is it strong national government or is it strong local government? And I really think we need to learn from those that are much more successful than we are in Scotland. And I do suspect that strong local government plays a big part in that, where you can come up with a strategic planning at a local level, at a regional level, and national government supports that with resources. But I think national government coming up with targets for travel to work areas, etc., is nothing more than politicians passing the buck. To be honest, we need to empower local government. Thank you.
Okay, I think so.
Oh.
We have time for one more very quick one. And if you could keep your answers short and sweet. This is actually a really nice question that's come in from Brenda, who asks, do you cycle? And regardless of whether you do or not, what would you like to change to make you personally cycle more?
I can
Okay,
take that one. I should have full confession. I'm the target person, and I'm having to do a mind switch and all the rest of it. During COVID, I have walked so many distances, and I have really enjoyed it, I have to say. Cycling, I want to do it, and I'm just about there, if you know what I mean. And I'll tell you what prevents me from doing it is because when I was at school, I didn't have the opportunity to learn how to cycle. And I think one of the things that hasn't come up tonight is the effect of poverty on people, that some people don't feel because of their personal circumstances that they have the choices to you know, take up more active travel because they've got other things that they're worried about, like feeding themselves and all the rest of it. So we can't separate looking at active travel away from that. The other thing is cultural aspects as well. You know, as a female woman of colour and as a young girl, it wasn't culturally acceptable for me to be going out and cycling. So I have that level of awareness as well, is that we need to reach out to our different minority communities and, you know, ask them what support they need in order to be more active and to get out on their bikes. And I have to say that, you know, just over the last 6 months, as I said, I'm just about there. I go cycle down at sort of Argyle Street, and I look at it, you know, from the window with my nose up thinking, I want to go in, I want to go, and I'm just about to get over the threshold and do it, because I don't have the confidence and, you know, to have the safer routes and do that. So, you know, I'd like to see the safer routes and be safe, and I'm ready to do it.
Hear, hear. Okay, Patrick.
Yeah, that cultural point you were just making there is really important, and organisations like Bikes for Refugees do fantastic work to try and overcome those issues. So they need a wee shout out and a bit of support as well. I cycle, and it is my favourite way of getting about the city. For all I have moaned about bad planning and bad cycle infrastructure and all of the other issues in Glasgow, cycling is still, as I said earlier, the most joyful and the most social way to get about the city. And I used to cycle when I was a student in Manchester, and that was I think at the time the busiest bus route in Europe. That route in from Fallowfield into the city centre, and I cycled there. But even having had that experience, when I moved back to Glasgow, I was afraid. I genuinely didn't want to go near a bike in Glasgow because it just felt too scary. Getting over that psychological barrier is the most important thing. And when I did, I realised and I remembered how fantastic and how empowering and exciting it is. And it's I would say it's the best change that I made in my life in the last 10-15 years is to cycle more. Back in the days when Twitter was a nice place to be instead of a toxic bin fire, one of my favourite tweets I ever saw that somebody tagged me in was saying, just saw Patrick Harvey cycling down Holyrood Road wearing a three-piece suit, looking like some kind of Scandinavian prime minister. And yes, that's exactly the look I was going for, and I still am. But yeah, it is something that needs support, and it needs to be better supported culturally, economically, socially, and physically. But it is still the best way to get about the city. It is superior urban transport in every sense. And the only thing that would make me cycle more is having more time off work at the moment. The election is helping, but hopefully in the summer I'll be able to overcome that.
Wonderful. I'm sure there are many people here who agree. Would anyone else like to give it this? Okay, David, and then we'll finish with you, Alex.
Yeah, so yeah, I do cycle. I'm quite benefited, and I've taken up my cycle to work scheme. So I've got a bike. Not been using it much in the past year, so it's actually on my back end trainer upstairs in the bedroom. But I have been quite benefited in my local gym. Actually rented out their spin bikes, so I've got a spin bike in the garage that I've been using to keep myself active and on the bike. And obviously, I'm not working from the office at the moment. I'm completely from home. But now that the weather's got slightly better, I'm hoping to get out my bike a bit more. So yeah, absolutely. Let's get more people out on bikes, encourage people to get out on bikes. I did my cycling proficiency when I was at school, and it's absolutely helped me feel confident on the road. And yeah, we just need to get more young people involved in cycling and make them feel safe.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Alex.
I think that's the key thing, is safety. I mean, I cycle if I'm in the gym, but when I was small till I was in my early 20s, I went every place on a bike. And I have to say, the difference in that time between now and then is the roads do not seem safe. I know it's different in cities, but one of the young guys that works with me in the Parliament, he got a new bike through that work scheme, and he was using it quite regularly, but he was terrified in terms of the winter time, the potholes, hitting one of them, etc., the state of the roads. He just didn't feel safe. I certainly, in a more rural area, I-5, wouldn't feel safe out on our roads here. As I say, where I live locally, the potholes, I've talked to parents in the last few weeks, so I've been trying to highlight some of the pothole issues, and kids do damage as a result of the state of the roads. So I'm not sure that our communities, our roads are built for cycling, and therefore we need to address that if we want to see cycling happening. But my answer would be, I would not feel safe to go out on the roads round about here on a bike, and neither would I feel safe for my grandchildren doing that. And yet when I was young, that was the only way you got about, was on a bike. Thank you.
Sure, and again, I'm sure there are many people here who absolutely agree with that. Oh, very quick then, David, very quick.
I just make one final point that I completely forgot to say in my last bit, which was, look, there's another aspect here that we haven't talked about, people who have access to cycling, and that's people who do have disabilities, etc. Now, cycling is something that does require a level of fitness, and I have, loved ones, etc., that would not be able to use a bike. So we also need to look at how we get people out on things like e-bikes that would assist them in being able to get out and enjoy that culture of cycling without maybe the fear of not being able to use a bike itself.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, John's got something.
Just to put it, it ties into what David said at the end, and also what Procap said earlier, was in Glasgow specifically, we have things like Free Feel North and other actual different charities that help adults learn how to cycle too. So it's not just about trying to get children how to cycle, it's also about adults. Another thing that Free Feel North do as well is get people that have got disabilities and other needs, where it's not just e-bikes but also tricycles, and then tries to encourage people to actually get around on bikes. So there are opportunities for not just children to first get into cycling, but also people that are a little bit past 21.
Great. Well, I'm afraid that is all the time for questions that we have now. I want to say a massive thank you to all the candidates for coming on to speak to us today. We've had a really interesting discussion, some really strong answers, some creative ideas, and it's just been really wonderful to hear your responses. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time on what we know is a really busy time for you all. We're just about to launch a wrap-up poll. If Nick could do that, please. We'd be grateful if you could complete that. We just wanted to know whether anything said tonight may have shifted your voting intentions. And while we do that, I want to also say a really big thank you to Cycling UK, in particular Nick, who's gone above and beyond. He's supported us very ably with their webinar facility and with his time. Thank you so much, Nick. And thanks also to Joel and Thomas for their excellent stopwatch timekeeping skills that they were busy with in the background. And finally, a big thank you to all of you for coming tonight, from everyone at GoBike. If you're not a member and you'd like to get more involved, please join up on our website. The more people we have actively involved in our campaign, the better chance we have of making our streets safer and more welcoming for everybody. And that just leaves me to say thank you, good night, and most importantly, use your vote. So thank you, everyone.